guys, Hengist here from House Hengist Comics, and a big welcome back to the channel. Today guys, we're back in the Battle of Hannut, and it's episode 42 from Blitzsteel in our Blitzkrieg series, the Hannut Handicap Stakes. But first, the news, and let's just take ourselves back. 75 years ago, it's D-Day, a huge operation, and one we should never ever forget. So let's also remember it began really here in Belgium in May 1940, and we're going to return to the scene of tragedy really here at Hannut. We're going to be looking at 3rd and 4th Panzer and the tank battles around here, and here you can see there's a huge number of small actions, and we're trying to explore the lot. But Sam has produced this map, and you can see here this is where we're going to be doing it. And ultimately we need to go back to a previous episode, because in this episode, in episode 39 I believe it was, we saw a massive counterstroke by French armour, nearly 100 tank models involved. It's a great episode, and all sorts of things were to occur. Effectively the Germans got caught out by a very aggressive counterattack by French medium and heavy tanks, and they were caught on the hop, so to speak, with light armour, very few Panzer 3s and 4s in realistic sort of combat conditions, and they were sort of driven in. I mean, these maps indicate what was going on in the battle, a lot of tactical back and forth. The Germans ultimately fought with a lot of tenacity, especially their light tanks, but we had French air attacks, massive assaults by both infantry and armour. You know, battalion commanders on the table, forced to flee, and ultimately the Panzers were driven in and driven off. But this is where it gets interesting, because it's what happens next after this battle. And we came to a lot of conclusions following this, and do freeze some of these frames so you can have a look. But ultimately, it's what decides this mission and its objectives that are really interesting. We see here now how the French are to suffer from that lack of mobility, having sort of given the Germans a real pasting. We will see in this battle how the Germans basically recover. They don't stop. This is the key thing. They're looking to exploit. And in this battle, what we'll see is basically two forces running parallel, trying to get to the end of the line to prevent flanking from either force. And ultimately the French will have motorbikes, as will the Germans, or their Kradschützen, and it's going to be a race really. The Germans have masses of advantage here based on their experience and their tactical training, especially with the Kradschützen, better rate of fire, more experience. And really we will see this, but it's going to be limited once again, because mechanized warfare is by logistics. So it's only 12 turns, otherwise there are going to be severe fuel checks. And this has to be factored into your tactics when you're operating in these sort of battlefields. So as you can see on this scape here, we've got the roads, the crossroads. Now this is key. When our force is going to basically turn, what is their objective going to be? What are their tactical plans in this situation? Ultimately, this is the end of the line. An old sort of church which has collapsed and overgrown. And really it's going to be who can get to that objective and secure it within the 12 turns before night and the refuel mandate. Now, we provide a lot of detail in our sets, and we encourage you to have a go, and it's good to see people are taking more attention to detail in their sets. It ultimately, in my opinion, produces a more immersive battlefield, and one where you can introduce a lot of the randoms that occur and the friction that is within a battlescape. So today we'll be using our system of Achtung Panzer, but whatever system you play, just enjoy it and wargame more. So let's get into the battle action, guys. It's a beautiful morning. That's not so if you're a French farmer, because with surprise, suddenly bursting onto the scene are Germans, and effectively both forces have to select what order of march they're in, and the Germans come on with light tanks, Kradschützen in the van, and their mediums. Now the French, on the other hand, basically bring their Sumas and light tanks and their bikes as well, and both sides are racing parallel. They're out of gunnery range, but their guns are traversing towards one another. You can just imagine this gallop towards the end point in the line. The Sumas are to be feared by the Germans, and they are actually really concerned about it because they know their Panzer IIIs, they've only got 3 of them. It's going to be difficult to deal with this type of threat, but they keep moving at such a pace. The Kratschützen are effectively, with their throttles fully turned, driving pell-mell down that road, as are the tanks. The forces are getting stronger and stronger as each turn. Guaranteed reserves turn up, and they're racing when they start to come to the crossroads, and this is where we start to see decisions that are going to be made which could affect the game. Now the Germans have a really set battle plan. Here's a widescape shot. You can see what's going on with this road and the ford, and it becomes very, very interesting as to what is going to happen next. Are they going to turn and engage each other? Are they going to try and cut each other up so that the other forces can't get to the end of the line? The French motorbikes only have a rate of fire of 2 against the Kratschützen of 3, and there are more Kratschützen, but the German armour, although it looks more, more in number, it's equally matched by the French. However, the turn count is so important. The Germans suffered so badly in the last battle, they are really worried about the fuel. And effectively, they bring on their second platoons. They're racing up with 2 light platoons now, really dashing. And they decide to turn first because they have a plan. The French keep moving and separate their forces, whilst the Germans bring up the OP that they have for their Gebs. But it's the Sumas here that really are, all eyes are on them because they can effectively change the course of this battle. But they've got to be used as the French bring on a lot of mechanized infantry support equipment, and this is showing the initial moves, and you can see very clearly what's going on with the green being the French. And ultimately, as these lines race against each other, there's been very little shooting at all. In fact, there haven't been the opportunity, and the Germans aren't intent on shooting through this game. They're intending on outmaneuvering the French, and they start to do this. It's a very good plan that they have, and I watched with considerable delight to see this plan unfold just as it should have been. And the French have got a shorter route to get to the end of the line. They get their bikes round, but the Kratschützen have doubled pretty much the whole way ahead, and they also come to that point. So here's the key objective. Now, ultimately, whilst this objective is live and can be taken at any point, it's got to be held by 12, and that's really critical. Now, the motorbikes have sort of rushed ahead of the infantry, and the infantry commander is a little bit frustrated because the Germans have decided that's exactly what they want to do. They're going to cut the French line. Here's their tactical plan. It's an excellent one, and it is fulfilled because they basically, effectively, don't worry about the Sumas. They try and concentrate on separating the infantry and preventing it get to the end of the line. So as the Germans move across the ford, they keep pushing really, really hard and fanning out. You can see these moves really beautifully illustrated. They're using all their light equipment to surround the French infantry, which is now really isolated, and dig buses nowhere near the end of the line. And really typical to French doctrine, decide that they're going to dig in and hold this position. But as the cow is dragged back towards its barn, the German panzers are across that field really quickly and now cutting into the line of the French. Now the French and the Sumas have got to the objective, and it looks a commanding sort of position that they're in. But this really belies an error that they've made, because those Sumas really haven't done anything yet, or are to during this battle. The Kratschützen sit and wait until their tactical position is revealed. The tanks overrun an OP, which was just left isolated, a careless mistake. And ultimately, the German panzers are able to really get in behind the Sumas. This is pretty bad news as they keep pouring their light tanks across. Now, these can be dealt with anti-tank guns and with a determined defence, but the French have really just got caught out. They're not sure really what to do, and in fact, the French motorised infantry commander is incensed with the French tank commander, because they've just been left and they're now being surrounded by a host of tanks. There's also 2 Geb guns on the table now, which start shelling impuniously. And it really looks as though from here you can just see how effective the Germans can be, and they opened fire. They've formed a gunnery line with their Kratschützen and have sort of really driven them off, but those Sumas are now in play and in a very dangerous position to cut off the Germans as well and cut their line. The Germans want them to do this. This is the irony of the whole situation. Drag them into a feint and effectively completely stop the infantry getting up to that end point. There is not a lot of firing in this game. It really is about manoeuvre, speed, versatility, tactics. And so it was really interesting to watch, especially when I knew exactly what the German plan was. It was very carefully thought out. And I have to say a real credit to the German commanders here. The French were really, I think, a little bit caught out on, they weren't too sure what to do. Once the situation unfolded, the cow gets back to the barn, that's the good news, and ultimately more French trucks arrive, but they're arriving into a position where they're going to have to debus, and this is exactly what basically the Germans want. And what we now see is this gunnery battle that's taking place around the old church, and the Kratschützen keep waiting and moving, but behind them and closing fast. Even though they're very effective and gunned down a lot of the French and forced them to disengage, I think they lose about 5 to 6 motorbike teams. They're driven back into the outskirts of that old walled church. But the Germans now are also about to suffer a surprise, because although their OP is in a good position, he is going to have to take drastic action. The French infantry now are all in good cover, but there's a weight of fire on them, which really is going to restrict when casualties start to take place. And really the French infantry are jostling around an improvised defensive position. It is very, very tough for them, because you can see armoured cars, 20 mils, lots of machine guns, light tanks. This is where they can be really deadly against infantry, especially if it doesn't really dig in effectively. But they do, and they hold their position around the pigsty. But now we see the Sumas break onto the road, right into, and you can just imagine the surprise of the light tanks, who are suddenly find themselves surrounded by 3 heavy tanks. The Gebs are really going to have to redirect their fire. The anti-tank guns from the French are too far back. They can't really do anything. Their range is limited, but they can hold the position. But around that edge, you can see how the Germans are beginning to dominate. And the French seem to be getting suckered and drawn into this plan. And ultimately, their gunnery rate is just far too low against the Kratschützen, who are so well trained and are much more difficult to basically deal with. It really is very difficult, but those Sumas do cause genuine panic. I've never seen so many light tanks flee, and they were fleeing all over the place, because once those beasts got going, it was going to be a terror moment, but it's too late, and they haven't really fired and caused any real damage to the Germans. But the Germans have totally bottled all that French supporting infantry. So 2 Kratschützen platoons, the light tanks completely dominating the crossroads, the Sumas really ineffective, and ultimately the French found themselves in an impossible position. They could halt, there's no question about that, until nightfall, but how they would have extricated themselves from that situation is beyond me. But as the Germans basically pushed down the road, knocking out tanks and effectively continuing this battle and driving the flank back, the Sumas themselves are smoked and effectively brought out of the game. They've got no targets, they're running low on fuel. And so ultimately it was ruled quite quickly within the 12 turns that it was a major German victory. The German forces got 4 stars, the French 3. So what can we say in postscript? This was very, very interesting. As a war game, it was fantastic. It went just about pitch perfect for the Germans in terms of plan and strategy, and that is great to see from a wargaming perspective. The poor French, I think, they just didn't get the mobility. And so ultimately what you end up with is an explanation really why the Germans are so good. Even though their tanks can't really take on the enemy, when they do it very, very cleverly and cunningly. But as D-Day is to the forefront of our minds, let's never forget, they were extremely brave men and women, and we owe so much to them. So this is Blitzkrieg. It's best wishes from me, and it's over and out from now. Bye for now.